are talking to Lex Smith. Lex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We are very excited. We had to go through a little technical difficulties to get you here, but we did it. Thanks to Scott.
Oh no,
Thanks, hon.
it was Lex's persistence. She
It
did
was
not give up.
you're right. You're right. It was
She was
Lex's persistence.
her extreme optimism.
Oh my
But you were a
goodness.
calm force throughout, hun. So really appreciate that. I was about to start panicking. Um, Lex, before we start, I'm going to ask you to tell us a secret, either a
Oh,
secret talent you have or a secret guilty pleasure.
oh my goodness. Well, I'd say a secret talent that I have is dancing, actually. Like,
Ah,
yeah,
really?
like hip hop dancing. It's not something I do for
What?
the public or on TikTok or anything like that. But it's been a huge part of my healing journey, and I just love it. So you'll often find me doing that around my house while I'm cleaning.
That's awesome. TikTok is missing out.
It's true. It is true.
Yes. I love it. That is a see, I wouldn't have said, oh, Lex is probably a really great hip hop dancer around her house. So that's a good one. Thank you for that. I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So, like I said, we're talking to Lex Smith. That's Lex.
hmm
And she was sex trafficked as a child in the Chicago suburbs. And she's now the COO of the national nonprofit Erase PTSD Now, um, which is fantastic. And I want to talk about your entire journey that led you to that place. Tell me first, Lex, how do you identify?
I identify as a cis woman and go by she, her pronouns. And I'm so
Excellent.
thrilled to share my story with you guys and your audience today.
Yay. So I'm just going to start with a statistic. The average age of a child sex trafficking victim is between the ages of 11 and 14. Family members exclusively traffic most children under the age of 10. Through a 2-year review of all suspected human trafficking incidents across the country, 40% of sex trafficking victims were identified as Black women. And so I bring this up because this is what actually you and I started talking about. I'm sitting here in front of your image, projected to me from Colorado. I'm in Los Angeles, and you're beautiful, you're blonde, you're white, you're young. Um, and so you are not someone that I would look at and think that this is your journey. So this is really one of the reasons I was so intrigued to talk to you. Uh, so you were 9 years old when all this started. Is that right?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. Can you just start by telling me about your neighborhood and your family while growing up?
Yeah, of course. I come from a very big, loud, boisterous Italian family. And the kind of family that has Sunday dinners. We all go over to my grandmother's house and always gathering around food, always kids running around, always welcoming any neighbor that wants to, come through. And my grandmother especially had a soft spot for kind of the wandering teenagers in within her community wherever she lived. And there happened to be one a couple doors down from her, and she at this time she lived in a pretty average middle to upper class neighborhood in the suburbs, and believe it or not, in a cul-de-sac. So my
Mm.
family outside
The
looking,
safest place,
right,
right?
one would think,
Yeah.
right? And this was
Yeah.
the time of age where kids would just tear up the neighborhood till the street lights came on, or your dad yelled out the door for you to come home for dinner, type of thing. So
Sure. Sure.
um this boy that she was inviting over, for family meals and allowing to have access to me, unfortunately, had gotten involved in an organized crime group,
Mm-hmm.
obviously unbeknownst to her. And I think at that time too, everyone was just a little naive, like not willing
Yeah.
to really look at and see the signs of things. And it's a beautiful thing to want to think the best of people um, and all of that. But I think now we're hearing all these stories and repercussions of, you know, later on when kids grow up and they regain their voice and their strength and they talk about what happened to them, um, it really falls back on, communities and families and, those over children really being a little naive and who they allowed access to kids. And that's really where my story begins.
Yeah. So you have this very large, noisy, boisterous, loving family, and you have kind of the matriarch who's your grandmother who lives in a separate house. Is that correct?
Yes. I
Yes,
still live.
but on the same, yeah,
I live nearby. My mom also had me in high school, and so my grandmother and I have a really special bond. And I spent most weekends with her.
with her. And so on this very noisy, in this very noisy family, other people were invited in, and the man or the boy that you're talking about, the teenage boy, was how old when you met him?
When I first met him, I believe he was 16 years old.
He was 16 and
Hmm.
you were 9.
Yeah, I was.
So what did that look like? How did you first perceive him? How did he get access to you? Tell me like how that happened. I know that we had talked about him grooming you, but
Yes.
tell us what that looked like.
Yeah. So, being 9 and having an older teenager show interest in you just felt like the coolest thing on the planet, right? We
Mm.
first started bonding over video games and building Lego, things. You know, there was like a wooded area nearby. We would go explore the woods, ride bikes, fairly normal connecting. And then he would just kind of
How long was it normal? How long was it
maybe
innocent?
like maybe just a couple months probably. And
Okay.
then he kind of started pushing my physical boundaries. So wanting to play things like wrestling, having a tickle fight, and it
Mhm.
turning into something else, which is a very, common tactic. So molestation kind of very quickly became part of our dynamic. And unbeknownst to him, but it's fairly common for people we would label as predators, which I feel that this person counts as one, even though he was very young. They seem to have a sense for individuals that are already wounded in some way.
Mm.
I think
Yes.
it's a very primal thing. And I had already been sexually abused by some cousins of mine, much closer in
Mm.
age than him, for years prior to that. That started around age 3 or 4. Um,
Oh, wow.
so there was,
I'm so sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's remarkably unfortunate, to say the least,
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to
and
say that
tragic.
then because I know that we recount these things sometimes and they're
Yeah.
part of a story, but I wanted to just sit on that for a minute
Hmm.
because if someone is hearing that and that's their story too, that,
Yeah.
that's they haven't done anything wrong and this
Hmm.
is something that they can talk to someone about.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, to the theme of your podcast, you're not the only one in the room. You might have been at the moment where that trauma happened,
Yeah.
but you're
Yes.
not alone, and it was tragic. And I think when tragedy is heard, it gets carried by other people and gets a little bit lighter on us. It
Mm,
doesn't mean that,
yes.
you have to do it like how I am in podcasts and in media. I don't think that's healthy for everyone, but yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So,
So this had happened to you. This was in your history already and your sense was that he picked up on this.
um,
And or just somehow knew,
yeah,
not that it happened, but that
right.
there was something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what makes it obvious is when someone tries to push a boundary and there's not a reactive response. So I had already been trained to kind of just
Ah.
freeze, kind of play dead, freeze, check out, dissociate from the situation, and it'll be over, soon, type of thing.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and that also could be confused for consent, especially for a young teenage boy. However, with the
Yes.
age gap, I think I think we all know he knew that was wrong. um,
Right.
but that is an interesting, point, especially for those that are dating. If you happen to be dating someone that has any sexual trauma in their past, communicating consent is very, very difficult, actually, when you're in the moment. So that's why it's really important for those conversations to happen beforehand. So you understand someone's boundaries before you're in like a sexual dynamic situation, because you're probably not going to get, the honest truth from them out of fear and just how their brain and their body has been trained from what happened.
Wow. I really want to talk about that a little bit later on, because I think that's such an important thing to explore. I don't think we talk about that very much in our society, even with the hashtag Me Too movement
Mm-hmm.
and Time's Up, etc. So he had full access to you outside of the house and also at his place as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, so most of our interactions were at my grandmother's, and then there was a period where things did transition to his house, which was a couple of doors down. And he was really smart about
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, and he would have me leave my grandmother's house on my bike and take a bike path that went into the woods and kind of um, cut behind his house, and that's how I would get to his house. So no one ever just saw this, like, 10-year-old kid walking into someone's house and then
Right, right.
followed by a random strange man, or vice versa. He was very,
Yeah.
very careful about how he went about things.
And so he knew that what he was asking you to do was was not okay to if you had told anybody, right? He didn't want your grandmother to know, he didn't want your parents to know. Did you know that did you just think it was cool that you were having like kind of an affair with this kid? Is that what it was like then?
No, not at all. So he actually threatened me right away
Oh,
with the
wow.
safety of my younger sister, and said if I told anyone or basically wasn't compliant, that they would do the same things to her. At that time, she was 7, 8,
Mm.
um, and I was very much
What
willing to die, to prevent that from ever happening to her.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
yeah.
So now you are I we talked about you taking the 3rd grade over, right? Because was that the year? Was that ninth grade or is that 10th grade? And when you're 10, rather.
Oh,
When you're 9, are you in the
I think, let's see, gosh, I think second
well,
second to third
regardless,
grade. Yeah. It's in
2nd
second
to
to
3rd
third
grade.
grade.
So you were dissociating in class,
I
right?
was
Um,
really bad.
and when this was spotted by your teacher, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that was the first person that really pinpointed something was off. Um,
Mhm.
my pediatrician also could have been one of those people. They just weren't. For example, I was having frequent bladder infections, um, unknown or unfounded pelvic pain, different things that are all kind of physical manifestations of trauma, very high, dealing with very high stress.
Yeah.
But no one really dug into it. So I was actually attending a private school at this time, and had a teacher, um, approach my parents and say, she's here physically, she's not being disruptive, but she's not here at all. And I got
Mm.
misdiagnosed with ADD, um,
Oh, wow.
because they thought that I just was having trouble focusing and couldn't pay attention in class.
Mhm.
Which there is
Mhm.
an element of that does exist for me. So they weren't totally wrong, but had my teacher been trained, been like a trauma informed teacher, she would have identified the difference in, ADD versus a trauma response dissociation, because school is my safe place. When I would go home, or end up going to my grandmother's, as a kid, you don't have a lot of control, where you're taken to, and things like that. So school is my safe place where my brain would just kind of shut down,
Mm.
and try to rest and process what was happening to me.
And what was happening to you at that point? Were you having intercourse then?
I was being raped.
You were
Yes.
being raped.
I was being raped, occasionally filmed as well.
Ugh. Um, so this is rape, this is sexual abuse, this is molestation. When did it turn to trafficking?
It took about a year from the point that I met him before it turned into that. And at first, it was kind of, I think, him testing me and testing my limits. And once he
Mm-hmm.
realized that I was going to be compliant, um, he had me come over and he had a friend there and he sold me to that friend for $50.
For
Or I'm sorry,
$50.
for $100. For $100, he had me give this person a lap dance, which he had been teaching me how to dance sexually. Thought it was for him,
Mm.
but it was actually training essentially for what was to come. So he sold me to that friend, and after that, he and a couple other friends basically made a sex tape, which now that I've learned more about it, recreated um, R. Kelly's sex tape with the young girl,
Yeah,
which was
Aaliyah.
circling,
Yeah.
at that time, just kind of like contextualizing it, like at that time that was really big in Chicago and in the suburbs.
Yes.
Um, and then he just was very excited about how much money I was going to make him, which was very confusing because I was making him happy, but I didn't know what that meant. But I found peace in making him happy, which is where those trauma bonds really begin in trying to control someone's
Mm.
behavior and change yourself into a particular way to reduce your trauma, which doesn't really.
But it's instinctual though, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, definitely wasn't
Yeah.
conscious of any of it at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just what happens when you've suffered that kind of trauma.
Absolutely.
Tell me the difference between pimps and traffickers.
They are the same. A pimp is the street name for a trafficker. But if when
Mhm.
pimps get prosecuted, the crime is trafficking. It's still, they're
Okay.
still called a trafficker. So it's kind of a difference
Yeah.
in cultural language versus legal language.
Got it. So you mentioned before that this was part of organized crime.
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah. So after kind of that tape was made, essentially what I'm assuming they did was use that footage to kind of advertise me in the community, and would arrange dates based on my availability when I happened to meet my grandmother's. Um, and I would come over. Actually, he would come get me. He would come get me and kind of same thing, pretend like you're riding your bike. I would come over. I would only be gone for 30, 45 minutes. So not long enough at that, day and age to alarm someone. That's like a normal, bike ride around the park, around the neighborhood time frame.
Yeah.
And when I would arrive, there was other men there. Was never allowed to know anyone's name. The only person's name I know is the boy that essentially recruited me in. And they were speaking a different language often to each other. Um, and I had
Do you
someone.
know what that language was?
I don't. I think I've heard it before, and it sounds similar to Russian,
Mhm.
but I'm not entirely sure what it was. It
Okay.
definitely wasn't, Spanish or something that is
Right,
more
right. Yeah,
easily something that I
yeah,
would hear, fairly often.
that you're more familiar with.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
actually didn't know until I was watching a movie and I heard, and it just like I was like, oh my God, like that sounds so
Mm.
familiar. So there was essentially, bodyguards, one at the door, one was always in the room with me to make sure that people weren't too rough on me, because then, of course, it would end their whole thing if someone figured it out. Um, there was someone that collected the money. Like it just became very professional, which is very different
Wow.
than I think the majority of sexual exploitation and trafficking that is going on in the United States nowadays. Not that that doesn't happen, but it is definitely different.
I mean, I'm really kind of blown away by how strategic they were with you
Hmm.
and how much planning and strategy went into this. Tell me though, you were at your grandmother's on weekends. Um, what did your life look like when you were at your parents' house after school? Did you play with friends? Like,
Hmm.
did you look like a normal kid?
I was completely normal outside of this, and that is the resilience of children. They can compartmentalize like no one's business, and everything is very in the moment. So I would still, play in the neighborhood with my friends. I babysat some of the younger kids in my neighborhood, which is crazy to think about, like a 10-year-old watching 5-year-olds. Crazy. But it happened. Um, I was my family is quite religious, and so I was at church like twice a week. I played sports. I did gymnastics. I was on the swim team. I was in choir.
Wow.
I mean, I was very, very normal
S-
looking.
Yes. So anybody that was watching for like the classic signs of trouble wouldn't have clocked you for that because you weren't
No.
withdrawn, you weren't staying in your room, you were social,
Hmm.
you were active. Um, and that's, I mean, that's really scary, Lex. That
Yeah.
is, as a parent, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Though that this is what the presentation could look like
Hmm.
for someone to whom all this really sinister, traumatic, horrific, nefarious things are happening.
Right.
And then there's, right, that juxtaposition.
Yeah, and the what a lot of people don't understand as well is that depression looks different in children. It's not
Oh,
always
tell me.
it's not always a shutdown, I don't want to eat, throw the covers over my head type of thing. It usually comes up as anger and moodiness, which is also common developmentally for the age frame that I was in. So I
Mhm.
did deal with a lot of depression. I became suicidal by 11. I was having night
Okay.
terrors, and just dealing with a lot of different things that my mom, my parents are divorced, and there's a lot of stuff going on at that time with my biological father. I wasn't connecting well with my stepfather. And so I think she kind of pinned a lot of it on that, or just, hormones coming into the picture, and, all of those things. It wasn't super blatantly obvious. And
Mhm.
growing up, with a under kind of a religious background, there's sometimes a lot of things that are talked about, I think, too early, and it creates such a heavy sense of shame that you become really good at hiding a lot very quickly, very early in life.
Like what do you mean?
For
What's talked about
example,
too
like
early?
being having anger, feeling rage, feeling shame, guilt, depression, anxiety, um, wanting to harm yourself, wanting to die.
Mhm.
Um, in the religious culture I was raised in, all of those things were very much demonized, talked about, very early on. And it's just kind of a focus on the rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, like be
Right.
joyful, be grateful, all these different
Mhm.
things. And none of that ever gets contextualized, right? It's just a very like
Right.
general, basic gloss over, message. However, as a child, that, really gets, really cuts deep to the core, and you feel like you have to manifest that all the time, or you're going to be a bad person, or there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you, or you're going to go to hell. So there's this
Mm.
like deep rooted fear of creating a very, very strong wall and a very thick mask so no one has any clue.
Wow. And how long did this go on? I know it started when you were
Mm-hmm.
9. How old were you when it stopped?
I was 13 when it stopped, which is when I hit puberty and developed breasts. And the people who were buying me did not like that at all.
Wow.
That's why it
Wow.
ended, was because I basically grew out of the
You were no
demographic
longer a
they were looking
child.
for. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I know that you mentioned that he was threatening you with that this is going to happen to your little sister.
Hmm.
Was there a similar reason for you not telling your parents earlier about what happened with your cousins? Um, earlier to you, earlier in your life? Was there a kind of a threat, or was it just like you knew it was taboo?
I knew it was taboo because in, that culture, there's such a focus on purity and talking about sex as this, bad thing. And so and there was also, even before I even knew about sex, um, I don't know, just like on a spiritual level, I knew what was happening was wrong, but I didn't know why. And so as a kid, you kind of process that as I'm wrong and I'm bad.
Hmm. Yes.
And so talking about it would expose me. I thought it would expose me, not the actual bad people or the people doing very
Right.
bad things.
Yeah.
And there's also a level of dissociation and a level of I didn't have the vocabulary. I really didn't. I didn't have the words. I wasn't taught even words for body parts. They were all given like
Mm.
coded names, and you know, I didn't even
Yeah.
know what sex acts were. And so I think around sixth grade, I learned the word molestation, and what that
Hmm.
meant, and that was the closest thing I had to describe what I was experiencing. Um, and I just felt so crushed by everything. I really just, you know, hit a hit a wall, and someone kind of could tell at one of my church groups. So they kind of approached me, and I ended up telling the youth pastor at the church that we were going to only about what had happened with my cousins, which was, very minimal, and that's very common for survivors to give minimal detail just to see if you can handle it. And if you can't handle it, then you're not really going to get much else, which was basically what happened for me. I got like jaws hit the floor. They were like, oh my gosh. And So they didn't really get anything else. And I was being trafficked at that time. So if it would have been handled
Mm.
better, those people could, be in jail where they deserve to be today.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned that, or you didn't mention, you said that this ended when you were 13, when
Mhm.
you started to go through puberty.
Mhm.
What was that like for you, it ending?
Those were the most violent moments. And the first time I experienced men's raging hatred towards women
Mm.
at the age of 13. I had people try to smother me. Um, I had someone, rip off their condom, and they intentionally gave me an STD at that time. Um, it was remarkably violent,
Wow.
and that's kind of the mark that that I got left with, even just like with men in general, because that's how they feel about women.
Yeah.
That's how they feel about me and my body. And I definitely went through a season of really body dysmorphia, and I just hated
Ah,
being a woman. I hated it so
yeah.
much.
And you were going through the period in your life where you were actually getting physical evidence that you are a woman,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Breasts are growing, hair is
Mm-hmm.
growing, things are changing.
Yep.
So you'd had this very violent end to this long, violent act against you.
Yeah.
Um, and you were, did did you still see him? The teenager, was he still around then? You still saw him at your grandma's, or?
Um, there was a period of time I think he was kind of perceived as like a drifter, like a pothead, just drifter kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And at one point, he just full on disappeared, and no one knew what happened to him or where he went. He was still alive. So I don't know if he just kind of picked up with that crew and they moved on to, other kids,
Mhm.
or or maybe he tried to get out of it. I have no idea. But there was never a like closure with him, saying goodbye or kind of like ending everything, it just sort of stopped randomly.
Mm. I'm having a really hard time picturing you going through all this on your own. Um, because I wanted to ask you if it was a relief when it ended, but
Mm.
I don't really hear that's what you're describing.
No, that was traumatic as well because I was bonded to him. And
Yeah.
he made me believe that he loved me. And on some level, especially when it first started, the dynamic was that of kind of like a boyfriend girlfriend. Even though in my mind I kind of knew he
Mhm.
probably has a real girlfriend in his high school,
Right.
but I still just loved the attention, the affection that I was getting, and then suddenly it was gone. And I remember asking about him and if he was okay, if anyone knew anything. I did look him up later on, and he's still alive, still living in the same area. Very
Mm.
much creepy still. Um, but yeah, it definitely, it's like on one level, it was a relief. The trafficking piece was a relief, but there was still an attachment to that person.
Sure. I mean, I don't want you to have one to him as
Right.
you're telling the story, but I understand it from the way you've described
Yeah.
how the relationship went. At what point did you tell your family what happened?
As far as that went, I actually have dissociative amnesia, and I didn't
Yes.
remember any of it until I hit college, which is
Okay.
pretty common. And I started having intrusive flashbacks and nightmares and memories just kind of surfacing out of nowhere. So everyone thought I was absolutely insane. Um, and you know, it almost killed me. It really did. It really almost
Mm.
killed me. I was hospitalized several times. It would put me into such shock because it's like it's happening again. Like I would feel everything again. It's like seeing it for the first time. And it's like, you know, what is this? Like I didn't remember this before. Like, how could you forget something like that? That's what you think is like, how could I possibly forget
Yeah.
something like that happened to me? But that's the brain's way of, trying to protect you, but it can only do that for so long. And then it kind of starts leaking out, which is what happened. So at that time,
Right.
my parents started finding out some of it, and it was impossible to believe, obviously, like with a family like ours, um,
Right.
they had no idea. And to think, that you raised like this perfect, amazing, wonderful family to find out there's this bleeding artery somewhere that you had no idea was
Mm.
so shocking. And it took them years to believe me and to come around. And I had to give them space for that process. And I understood it as that. And I just kind of left them alone. There was a time period where we really didn't have relationship because I couldn't heal in the middle of their
Mm.
denial. Like that was not going to happen. And I was going to die if I didn't heal. So
Right.
eventually, they were able to come around and have space to hear everything and understand what happened. And now we're on great terms, and they fully believe, everything. My mom and I have done conferences together, kind of sharing our stories side by side, which is really
Mm.
interesting. Like hearing, her as a mother talking about just these, different issues she would have with me, but she didn't realize was what it was until you look back, and now you have a list of signs and it matches identically to the signs
Right.
that you look for when children are being abused.
So 2 questions. I wanna know what one of those things is that she would talk about. Can you tell me that first?
Yeah. So one of the things my mom shared, signs that she kind of missed was a lot of the mysterious medical issues that I would complain about. I would complain about stomach aches, and I was constantly having, different infections and just all these very random, bizarre things that didn't make sense. And when they would look into it, they would find nothing. That's definitely a big one.
Mhm. Wow. And then when you all were able to come together after they had processed. Did you do that with a professional or was it just the three of you?
We did with professionals, but separately. It wasn't like a family therapy
Okay.
situation. Yeah, but I allowed them to speak to, my therapist. Um, and my, I think all parents are, you know, can be flawed. But even in the midst of my mom's denial, she saw that she was going to lose me, and helped me
Mm,
find this really remarkable trauma therapist that developed a lot of um, the the tactics that they use now, and was able to talk to her and ask those questions of how do we know these memories are real?
right.
Because there's this study in the 80s that went around about false memories, and it really like latched on into culture in general, and that
Mhm.
has been debunked since then, like entirely debunked. However, people just still really, really hold on to that concept of false memories, and was able to kind of talk with professionals through, here's how we know that these memories are actually real and she's not making it up.
Wow. Wow. All right. Um,
I know.
first of all, I no, it's so much, but it's so important, and you gave me more information this time than when I talked to you the first time,
Yeah.
and that took me a couple of days to process afterward. And because it's first of all, you tell it so well, and you're so articulate about your experience. You're able to really with seemingly without any blame of yourself recount what happened, which is so mature and so evolved. Mature isn't the right word. It's somebody who's healed or is
Yeah.
healing and not going the other way.
Hmm.
So tell me about Erase PTSD now
Yeah.
and how that come about and what you do there.
Yeah. So, kind of on that healing note, I have tried and done everything, everything I could, at least that I could access. There's plenty of things that I just, could not afford. Um, and I really reached this point. At this point, I've been going to therapy for over 10 years, seeing different types of trauma therapists with different modalities, a lot of them very helpful, but I was still stuck. And what I've learned is that when we experience trauma, it's actually an injury to our nervous system. However,
Mm,
you can't scan a nervous system like you can a bone. So we have all these people essentially walking around with broken legs, but it's their nervous system which controls so much. And when your nervous system goes down or is, very dysfunctional, it creates all types of different mental health issues, as well as physical issues can get into your endocrine system. Eventually, as kind of this path to heart disease, diabetes,
mm,
hypertension, all of our really major health crises problems in the United States. Um, and I found myself in this place, it was kind of during COVID, of just absolute overwhelm uh, with any noise, anything that was slightly stimulating was entirely too much. And I would have to sit in a room with the lights off, with a weighted blanket on, and smother all of the noise out and just exist. So
mhm.
obviously not thriving.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so I started kind of looking, I'm like, maybe by now there's something else like that could really help me because I'm going to lose my whole life. I can barely work. And we all know disability is not enough to live on.
No.
And I also had a dissociation episode while driving. So I kind of hit this point of like, I know where this road is heading and I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And I learned about um, essentially a PTSD shot. It's an injection. It's called an SGB, for PTSD. And what it is a small amount of lidocaine. So very similar to, an epidural. And lidocaine has been around since like 19 25. It's our most
Yeah.
researched drug and safest drug. And it's a very quick outpatient procedure. I chose to go to sleep because I don't like needles. And within 10 minutes, they basically do this injection into or close to your vertebrae. It doesn't actually touch anything or go into your brain or anything crazy like that.
So it's
And
like in the back of your neck?
yeah, so they kind of go through the muscle to get to your C4, C5 in your neck, which is
Mhm.
where your stellate ganglion is, which is a large, basically railway station of nerves. And what happens with PTSD is there's a new type of, and I'm trying to not get super sciencey heady here, but this, like, I love it. I'm going to get my PhD in this. And essentially, what happens is there's a new type of nerve that grows um, directly from the amygdala into your nervous system. It's not the same nerve that
Mhm.
runs through your body. It's you can think of it almost like as cobwebs. And basically, what the lidocaine does is that type of tissue doesn't survive. So then it allows everything to kind of fully reset and function like it did before the trauma happened. And I remember waking up
Wow.
and I could breathe for the first time in my life. And I didn't even realize that I was holding my breath so much. And I practiced deep breathing exercises and I meditated and I did yoga, religiously. And um, then I started having, I had a bunch of autoimmune issues go away. I was allergic to all fruit, a lot of vegetables, nuts, dairy, gluten. I mean, I could hardly eat anything. I had rashes that just couldn't figure out how to get them to go away. Within 24 hours, those rashes were going away. I could breathe. I could sleep. I wasn't having nightmares. And I could tell a difference in my cognition and my ability to think. And I felt like I was like using my whole brain for the first time. It was completely euphoric. And that treatment was a year ago at this point. And while getting that treatment, obviously I come from the world of helping victims of violent crime. And when I woke up, I thought of all these women that didn't make it,
Mm.
you know, and how much something like this could have saved their life. They could have had a life. Their children could have had a mother. Um, and so I was mad. I was so mad. And I had a meeting with the doctor who did my procedure, and he actually invented the procedure. His name is Dr. Eugene Lipov. And I was like, why haven't I heard of this? Because I'm a researcher by nature, and I'm always
Mm.
staying up to date on, best practices and what's coming out and what's developing. I'm like, why haven't I heard of this? And essentially, the reason why a lot of us haven't heard of it is because they started doing a lot of the studying and testing within the military. So the military population has been using this since 2008, and really just
Really?
keeping it a secret from all of us. Yeah, I mean,
That's incredible.
Fort Bragg is doing 3,000 of these a month. It's very common within the military population to have access to this, but for whatever reason, it just really wasn't escaping, military individuals. And what's funny is it wasn't even being offered to their wives or their children who experience vicarious trauma, from
Mhm.
the parent that is in the military. So, oddly enough, I ended up having to fundraise. I did a GoFundMe to even be able to get my treatment. And now, full circle, what we do at Erase PTSD Now is we remove those financial barriers for people that can't afford it. And since coming on, I've gotten the word out a little bit more, and I unfortunately have a waiting list of over 700 people that are begging for help. So we're in
Wow.
a big fundraising mode, trying to meet the needs, but it's truly remarkable, and it's also sad how many people really minimize their experience in life and don't realize that they do have PTSD. This is not something that is exclusive to veterans or survivors of sex trafficking. It's people that grew up in a home with a really cranky dad that would just like fly off the handle. But doing
Mm-hmm.
that for years at a time injures your nervous system in the same way that experiencing something extremely violent one time would do. And I think
Oh.
that is, I would say, a majority experience, not a minority experience.
I would say so too. I mean, so this is another thing I didn't know. I'm blown away by this. I just want to make sure I understand. This is an outpatient procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? You were sedated for yours, but you could have remained awake for it.
Yeah, it's
And
optional.
it's an injection. It's an
Mm-hmm.
injection of lidocaine. Is there anything else?
That's it. It's literally,
It's just an injection of lidocaine.
yeah.
Yeah, which is a very safe. I've had lidocaine I think I had topical lidocaine for something.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember
Mm-hmm.
what it was, but I know that it's been used on me
Mm-hmm.
numerous times, and I think of it as a numbing agent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the way that it's used to treat PTSD, in the case of you and all these other people, is
Mm-hmm.
that it erases the source of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it gets
Or
at
it blocks the source?
Yeah, it gets at the biological component, which is something that's missing from treating PTSD and recognizing that it's a biological injury. And basically what we're doing is we're sending people to, mental health therapists, which is the same thing as sending someone with a broken leg who needs surgery to a physical therapist, thinking that eventually they're going to be fully functional. So in that same
Right.
scenario, if you have a broken leg going to a physical therapist, you're going to be doing physical therapy for years and years and years. And you're probably not going to get any
Mhm.
better,
Yeah.
because you need surgery, you need intervention, you need a medical intervention, and
Medical
it's no
intervention.
different in that. And we actually really noticed a difference after I had it. Once that biological component was calmed down, my therapist wasn't having to spend so much time trying to calm my anxieties and make me feel safe. And we could actually do the work, and I could handle approaching different memories and experiences where I couldn't before. I would just dissociate completely out of the
Wow.
room. So I've been able to get a lot farther in my therapy, and my therapy skills now work, whereas before it didn't. It just felt like I was using a sponge to like stop a hose. It's just
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
effective.
No. I complete and it's I tell me the doctor's name again. I forgot.
Is Dr. Eugene Lipov.
Is he the only one administering these or doing
No,
this procedure?
no, not at
No.
all. He's actually been training a lot of people for years, and there is a incredible medical center, which is our primary medical partner. That's Stella Center, and there are over 40 locations in the United States, and actually a couple in Australia now, where they're just doing these,
Excellent.
routinely every single day.
Wow. How long does it last?
It really depends. It depends on if someone has a therapist. We've noticed that that does kind of help the results stick. It depends on the environment someone's going back to. So if you have an abusive partner or a toxic work environment and you go right back to it, well, you'll have relief for a little while, but
Right.
it's going to come back because you're currently experiencing trauma.
Mhm.
However, those that have, I'd say a normal amount of trauma, I would say I probably have obviously an above average amount of trauma. Some only need it once or twice, and that's it, and they're
Yeah.
good for years. There's actually an outlier that Dr. Lipov has talked about before, where I think she's somewhere between 8 and 10 years post treatment, and she's still
Wow.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing. Amazing. Well, look, I we're at the end of the interview and I didn't get to ask you about things like controlling access to your children for parents,
mm,
and other signs to look out for. But you do have a Scott Talks episode that will release tomorrow. Maybe Scott will talk to you about that a little bit, or I'm sure people can go to your website just to learn more or to connect with you. Is
sure.
that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm also on Instagram, and I talk a lot about these things on here. And if people are asking me the same question, I'll often just do a video on Instagram. I am CPTSD underscore Lex. CPTSD is just complex PTSD, which is what I
Uh-huh.
talk a lot about on there.
I'm looking it up right now. And I'll start following you. If I'm not already following you, I might be. All right. So Erase PTSD Now
Mm-hmm.
is the name of, is it a company? No, it's a
It's a nonprofit
organization.
organization. Yeah.
Yes. And so definitely check them out. Check Lex out
Mm-hmm.
at Complex PTSD. You know, is CPTSD?
Yeah.
Is that right?
CPTSD underscore Lex.
Underscore Lex on
Yeah.
Instagram. Anywhere else they can find you?
I do have a website. It's called traumainformedtraining.com. It's pretty basic right now, so that'll get upgraded soon, but you can contact me there.
Great. And all of this will also be in the show notes. So if you're listening and you don't have something to write with or a bad memory like me, just click the link in the show notes and then you'll be able to find her. Lex, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for being so candid and so vulnerable, so willing to tell your story and that it can help others. I think you are an extraordinary cautionary tale. And I think that a lot of people, including me, will be on the lookout for these things which I wouldn't have looked out for before hearing your story. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening and being so empathic and giving me space to share. Hi, my name is Lex Smith, and I'm the only survivor of sex trafficking who's erasing PTSD now.